How did L. Ron Hubbard become Source? He used to be the founder, and then he became Source. Well, we've got some great stories, again, from our guest, Mike Goldstein, including his time in the Rehabilitation Project Force. Stay tuned. I think you're going to enjoy this one. Welcome, everyone, to our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher. I'm here with Janis, Gillham, Grady. Good day, Janis. How are you today?
G'day, Mark. G'day, everybody, and welcome to Scientology Peeling the Onion. Hey, we've been having a lot of fun lately with our Mike Goldstein interviews.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of people are enjoying those. So today, what are we going to do? Another Mike Goldstein interview.
One of the things they comment on is how good a memory he has and details, just like you do, Janis.
Yeah, we're like challenging each other here.
Yeah, but it's good. It's good. We're trying to, lay out the story, and I think people are enjoying it. A lot of good comments and a lot of views and all that. So anyway, we hope you continue to enjoy it because Mike is willing to give us his time to do these stories and stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on Mike Goldstein. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Mark?
I'm good. Everything good there in Colorado?
Yeah. And Janis, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm enjoying the heat.
Nice.
Yeah, it's 95 degrees here. Yeah.
70s here, so not too bad.
Hey, Mike, you said you got an interesting comment fact checked by your son, right? What was that?
Oh, yeah. He said, Dad, my last birthday, in April, he turned 46, not 45. He said, what's the matter? You know how old I am? Yeah. So it was 46. Yeah. I'm 45. He's 46.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're going to pick up where we left off last time, Mike, and I think you had something you wanted to talk about at the very beginning here.
Well, we were talking about the LRH Properties Chief post. And as I went back and watched the video. And so as I'm watching it, I realized, most of the time when I'm doing these, I'm kind of putting myself into that point of view that I was at that time so I can remember this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And when I was talking about it before, I was kind of looking from where I was looking from at the time. What I was thinking at that time after he put me on that post and I heard that the tape that I mentioned, his hat write up to me. And from that point on, I was not really in a position where I really wanted to do the post the way he had laid it out. I thought it was pretty silly, but I wasn't at a point where I could express myself to him at that time and say, wait a minute, this does not make any, this is pretty crazy. But to people watching this and to people at the time, that's not something that would have been understood. I wouldn't even have understood it if I'd really thought about it at that time, because the name of the post was LRH Properties Chief, and that properties meant anything that he wrote or put out, anything copyrighted, any kind of materials, books, tapes, everything, the technology, the whole bit. That's properties that he considered were LRH properties. And the purpose of my post was to, as he put it, exploit them, right? And what does that mean? It meant get the fullest out of them, right? And most of this, and so it would be logical for people to think, well, they listen to this tape, then whatever it takes to sell those things and put more money in as royalties to him, that was the purpose. As you mentioned last time, afterwards, the post that he created from that, and a lot of them, like with what Franny was doing with Arthur Services, were to promote his stuff and to promote LRH. So it made sense from that point of view to put me in the PRO bureau and have me do that. And why my mind was just not into that at all. I couldn't see it based on what he'd said on that tape to me, what he had actually talked about, things he'd mentioned before, and even the basic definition of exploit, to really bring these things to the most. And the whole post being all about him and making him royalties just wasn't logical to me. If he wanted to make more money, then why not do it the proper way and promote it to, to the world, not to just people that are already in lines to get more money out of them. So that was really the disagreements I had. And for some reason at the time, I just couldn't say it to him. So what I tended to do at that point was I just sort of did the other functions that I was supposed to do within the PRO office, the things that we were doing. And as far as my post, I just sort of kept pushing it off to the side and working on something of my own, which was expanding it, which was book one, which I mentioned before. And that was working with people that it did make sense to, like Sandra Johnson,
Right.
Terry Gleason. But to these other people, like to Laurel and Ken, of course, it looked like I'd gone off the deep end. Why would I not do the LRH program the way he wrote it? To him, I think he was also confused. Now that I'm looking at it, at the time, you know what I'm saying? But at the time, it just didn't make sense. If he wanted to make money for himself, if he wanted to make more in royalties, then what if we, get it out to the world? That's going to do better, and also expand Scientology.
Well, Mike, in relation to that of him trying to make more money for himself, what he had said to me at that time period was that he needed to make more money so that if the church went under because of the money owed to the IRS and all that type of thing, that he would be able to bail it out. Because back in the 50s, he didn't have any money to bail out Dianetics. So he wanted to make sure that if something happened, he could restart everything from scratch and have money to do that.
Well,
Janis, can you also explain to the story that we were just talking about, LRH, his motorcycle accident and how he changed from one, then he became Source? That's an interesting story I think people haven't heard.
Yeah, well, when we were off screen, Mike and I started talking to remember some things of this time period. And it was in late 73 after Hubbard came back from New York, and he got this motorbike, and he normally rode a smaller one that Mary Sue had given him, a 250cc motorbike, which was very manageable. But he was given this bigger one from Mike Maurer, I believe it was. And he would go off on this bike, on bike rides. Arthur used to go with him when he was on the smaller bike, and Arthur would be on his own little 50cc. But this time he went off on his own, and that morning Mary Sue had given him some bad news. And he didn't say anything to any of us, and he went off on his bike ride, and he hit an oil spill on the curvy roads on the island. And he had a camera bag under his, over his shoulder and under his arm. And when he hit that spill, he actually ended up breaking his rib from the camera bag. And a couple of locals came by and saw him and helped him get back up and dust him off and pull the bike up and get him back on it. Meanwhile, he lost his left arm was what was all busted up from that. And he rode back to the ship, and I was on watch, and I see him coming back real slow, and I'm like, something is wrong. And I went running down that gangway, and Bert Rousseau, I believe, was the transportation in charge for Hubbard's bikes and cars at that time. And Bert came running down behind me, and I quickly grabbed the bike, and Bert then took it from me because, I couldn't hold this big thing, but I at least got it to get some weight off of Hubbard. And he got off and said he'd had an accident and went up to his cabin. And Laurel, his PR, she came along, and she ended up trying to get him to go to a doctor's. And at first he wouldn't, but she did eventually get him there. But he said to me that he was PTS, a potential trouble source, because Mary Sue had given him news that morning that he was not allowed in Spain again. And so he felt, it's like, okay, we've just lost another country. Where are we going to go? We keep losing countries. And so So he did feel he was PTS. And there's people who like didn't quite understand that. But yes, he did feel because he had the accident and he hurt himself, he was PTS. And that needed to be addressed. And anyway, he ended up staying in his cabin for a long time, healing. And this was before Christmas. And even afterwards in January was when he was so mad about orders not getting done. He told Ken Urquhart to come up with a solution. And that's when Ken Urquhart came up with the Rehabilitation Project Force. And he just implemented it without telling Hubbard until Hubbard heard about it from one of the messengers. And I think it was Jill Goodman who did the message run to Ken on that. And so that was then the creation of the RPF. And when Hubbard finally, while he was still in his cabin, he then started a whole thing with Captain Norman Starkey of any time certain orders or a whole list of projects to get done weren't gotten done, someone was to go to the RPF. And so poor Norman kept getting these message runs, and every day it was like, who's going to the RPF today? And it was just totally insane. And you could tell something was going on with Hubbard. It wasn't his usual. I mean, yeah, he had his temper and so forth, but this was totally brutal what he was doing to the crew, who were all there pretty much, you would say, as volunteers. So anyway, when he finally healed and started going back up to work in his office is when he came out with, he had Laurel, meanwhile, and Liz, who were his public relations, along with Mike, but these two ladies had to find all his medals that he'd gotten from when he was in the Navy and find different things and put together a whole booklet on his different accomplishments. And from that, he then decided to send out source missions to all the orgs. And so all these missionaries were selected, and he even did a whole briefing to them in his office. It was the biggest briefing he'd done since his old St. Hill days. And there was, all these chairs, just the whole office was full. And never had that many people. Maybe about 40, 50 people were all squeezed in there. Anyway, he did a source briefing to them. And he was no longer pushing himself as the founder. He was pushing himself as the source of Scientology, which is a different concept. Because before he would say he founded it and he found a good way. It was already existing technology and he found a good way to make it usable. Well, now he was source. He was the cause of it all from the beginning is kind of how it was now coming across. So then there was all these source missions being done. And I just felt from that stage, he didn't seem the same after that accident.
Yeah.
Well, he was definitely different than when I went to Europe.
Right.
That I remember for sure. Right. And yet there was, it probably fit into what I was seeing at the time. And partly, the difficulty for me, like I mentioned before, was that even though it was a post that dealt with his PR, and he believed that if we increased those things and increased that, then it would increase the overall of Scientology. It would increase expansion by just doing that, right? And it was kind of like the book. Volunteer Ministers Program. All right, he puts the book out, but then, now we're going to totally change the planet using this because we're going to create all these volunteer ministers. We're going to do all this. This kind of a lame program to go along with it. But the real thing was the book was the property, really. I mean, both those books that were put together while I was there, Dianetics Today and the Volunteer Ministers Program, were both compilations. Like, I think all of his books were compilations except for Dianetics. I believe everyone, even, I mean, they were, and a lot of them weren't even compiled by him. like New Slant on Life, for example, was compiled by Mila Galusha. She put that book together. Other people,
Well, and then like the Phoenix lectures was a compilation of the lectures.
Of the lectures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Mary Sue did some of those compilations too, and they took the lectures and just put them all into book form.
Right. The only actual book I think he ever wrote in Scientology from beginning to end was DMSMH. The rest were compilations in some way. So,
well, Science of Survival probably too.
It was. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was. And so here, this was the post to promote these books and get these books being sold. And it didn't matter from that point of view whether you sold it to people online or told it to new people. The whole point was that. But truly, if you really wanted to do that, then if you were doing a promotional campaign, not just to people online, but trying to forward the whole movement, it would be so much better. He would make tons of money if you did that way. And so that's why it just didn't make sense, what was being done, and why my attention was on, all right, so let's get it out to, let's forward the whole thing. In other words, it was kind of an add-on. Here we got the book. Well, if we also do this program, it'll also forward Scientology. It's kind of like what he ended up doing with SMI when he started Scientology Missions International. This is before I listened to a tape that a lecture he was giving on that to Miscavige, actually, about SMI at some time before. And SMI originally, the purpose of it was to people that were online. I mean, people that had a lot of money, that had already bought all their levels, paid for everything, and they still got lots of money. How do we get more money out of them? We get them to buy a mission, right?
A mission package.
The mission meant the package.
With a territory, like a franchise that had maps and all that.
Yeah, you give them a bunch of materials and stuff, but you just sell this whole big package to somebody, and then you marry them, as he said, with some other person that could be the ED. They're the franchise holder. Then you get an ED, and kind of the thing was, well, and what'll happen was, we do this, and if we get anything done, if there's any kind of expansion, that's a bonus. You follow it. It wasn't something to get Scientology out. It was started with the purpose of getting 25 grand or whatever it was out of these rich people. And if something else gets done, and that's the way it seemed to me when he was doing the LRH Properties Chief post. Yeah, if we do all these things, then then this could happen. Or then it was like, but why not just go for that itself?
Let me ask a question. Because Janis, you brought up the point that Hubbard, started worrying about his own money or whatever, because in case Scientology had to pay the IRS or something happened, he wouldn't lose it like he did Dianetics in the 50s. So that seemed to be more of his attention, because it seems to make sense too. I'm not trying to justify what he did, but like you said, Spain kicked him out, countries were kicking him out, and he's going like, how is Scientology going to survive? And I need to build myself up, make a lot more money for Scientology so that it survives past my living, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing about Spain, by the way, that must have happened later, because while I was on the ship still, and while I was, we were still in Spain. We hadn't been kicked out of Spain yet.
No, I know, but what I'm talking about, though, is like shortly thereafter in 75 or 76 or whatever it was, the price increases started and all these things. They were like, focus on, I need to get money, but also the attacks were coming in heavy then too, And
it made sense that he would put me on a money post because of the dictator bringing that money in, and the fact that I gave him bonuses of more than he ever got from anybody. So it made sense for him to put me on that post. But for some reason, for a reason I know, I couldn't do it. It just didn't register, because if he wanted to make money like that, then it would be better to do it the other way. It just didn't make sense to have that as a secondary goal. Let's just do the marketing, do it right. Let's get it out there. There'll be plenty of money. And by the way, I'll mention this later too. What happened in the 50s was not that he ran out of money. It was that he had somebody else had control of Dianetics. He had a money man. This I learned from John Galusha. I'll tell you that story. That's a very interesting story. How he ended up going to Phoenix from Wichita because of that. Because somebody else said, no, you can't do this. And he basically controlled Scientology. He controlled Dianetics because he had the money.
Controlled Dianetics, the Dianetics Research Foundation and all that.
He controlled it. I think his name was Charles Parcell. I think
Don Parcell.
Was it Charlie Parcell?
Don? I thought it was Don Parcell.
Wasn't Charles.
I don't remember.
Don Purcell. It was somebody.
It was somebody else. And the story I learned from John Galusha at the time when that happened was that he was starting to do Scientology stuff and talk about past lives. And this guy said, "No, dude, you're not doing that. We have a good thing going. Why are you getting in all this weird stuff?" And LRH would not be the person to be told, "You can't do this." So he says, "I'm going to do it." What are you talking about? The guy says, "Well, I own it. You can't do it." And LRH ended up going to Phoenix with a group of people. The rest of them stayed with his other guy, whoever it was, in Wichita, and kept all the tapes and all of his audio tapes and everything they had. This guy held on to, and not too many people went with LRH. John Galusha was one. And when they got there, he even said to him, he told him, he called this small group together, the ones that went to him, and said, "We will never be financed by anybody again." That was what he had said at the time. And then he wanted John to go back and go through the skylight and run a magnet over the tapes to make sure that they were all destroyed.
That's John there, isn't it?
That's John. Yeah.
Tell everybody who he is. I don't even know who he is.
Yeah, John Galusha was somebody I ended up working with later, which I'll get into. But John Galusha got involved in 1950 when he bought Dianetics after seeing it advertised in Amazing Science Fiction, and he bought the book, and he walked out of the post office and picked it up, came back, read it, then read it twice, then grabbed somebody and started working with him, and then had a practice going. So he worked that way until 1952, when he went to Wichita to do the first Dianetics course.
Is that him there with Hubbard?
Yeah, that's in D.C. at, I think, 58 or 59 Congress. But that was, John started with him, and when he went down to do the course, he went with another guy, friend of his named Haskell Cook, who was a friend of your mom. You know Haskell.
Yeah, my mom dated Haskell.
That's right. Yeah, I know. And Haskell and John, Haskell was a pilot, and they flew down from Colorado to Wichita to do the first course. And John stuck with him there and became his right-hand researcher and helped research side. They delivered all the early ACCs, Congresses, then went to Phoenix, then went to DC, and so on, which I'll get into later. And then I met John later. But yeah, it was at that was kind of how he got into it. But getting way ahead of myself.
Let me ask, I want to ask Janis. Janis, you'd mentioned something too before we went on to air of during this source mission time and all that, all of a sudden, it was hip, hip, hooray. Tell that story.
I know. I was trying to find an opening to come back to that because I forgot to mention it. Yeah. Those source missions, when they all went out to the orgs, how they did in briefing people was based on how long the applause was. And that's also what was done with the Apollo stars and the musicians. Their stats were based on applause. And so, of course, if you're trying to get more applause, you go hip, hip, hooray. And so everyone's hip, hip, hooray keeps clapping. And that's how that came about.
That's how it became hip, hip, hooray to LRH, right? I mean, shoot, that was a staple at the events. To a photograph.
Because people go, boy, those Scientologists are weird. Clapping to a photo and yelling hip, hip, hooray 3 times. Well, that was from those source missions.
Well, and it's kind of apropos, I was mentioning as well, currently right now, Tom DeVocht is writing his story on Substack, and he's talking about Miscavige, who, and Janis, a lot of the things that he talks about in this thing is stuff that you and I we figured out a long time ago, was that Hubbard or that Miscavige wanted to run Scientology based on these events and just how much applause. And so he had his Shelley Miscavige record how much applause time each of the speakers would get, meaning him, Mark Yeager, Ray Midoff, Heber Jens, whoever. And if somebody got more applause time than he did, they were in trouble. Okay. Like that's how he started, using this. And then basically he eventually just went, well, I'm not going to have them do anything. I'll do it all. And that way I get all the applause. And it was all just to basically stoke his ego,
Yeah.
Makes sense.
That's very interesting. Yeah. At that time, when I was on that post, I remember some of the other things he would have me do. Like he actually got me started writing, believe it or not. He had me write his first biography.
Really?
Yeah, it was on that blue on white, it was on some kind of issue.
Yeah. There's a different issue type.
Yeah, it was some kind
Wasn't it like a PRED or something, or LRHED?
Yeah.
LRHED was the blue on blue.
Blue on white. Yeah,
blue on blue or something. It was like it was about 8 pages long. I'd never written anything like that. And I wasn't a writer. I didn't know how to write. He wants me to do this, but I sat down to write it. But where am I going to research? Where's the library? Where's anything to research other than just the materials we have on the ship? So what that biography ended up becoming was another kind of compilation from stuff I could find in the backs of books and other things people have said to put in there. And one of the interesting things about that was that I remembered this story that everybody at that time knew. I didn't know where it was written, but it was some of these things that goes around by word of mouth. And it was a story that LRH had studied with a personal student of Sigmund Freud's by the name of Commander Snake Thompson.
Right.
You ever hear that? And he had studied with them. And that's all but you could talk to anybody. Everybody heard that. But where was it written anywhere? Except maybe it was in the back of some, but I wanted more. I thought of the one thing, because everything else was just kind of rote. So I figured I want to put more information about that. That's pretty interesting. So I asked him about it. I wrote up to, I says, what about, can you give me more information that I could put in this? And what he told me was, I didn't study with him. I go, what? What do you mean you did? He says, no. He was an acquaintance of my father's who, when I was 12 years old, I met and shook his hand once. And I went, okay. And after I walked, I was thinking, well, how everybody knows this. How does this story exist? You know what I'm saying? Still, that kind of a thing. And anyway, it was kind of interesting. To me, it was like he knew it. He knew about it, but just left it. Do you know what I'm saying? Right. It was like no fact check on it, so to speak.
Well, it was like that also with his military medals too, because a lot of those you could order online. I mean, we found out later on that a lot of them he didn't really earn, and his military record was not as decorated as he portrayed it to be.
But he had a thing
called online.
Yeah, well, but
there was always.
You didn't have online. You didn't have online in those days.
No, you couldn't look up anyway. No. But the thing that made all that okay to do was the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics.
Exactly.
Which all that meant was the end justifies the means. It's all that meant.
Right.
It's okay. We're saving the planet. So if I have to lie, it's the greatest good, or it's the end justifies the means. When in fact, it doesn't ever. Not really.
Well, and then there's people now that criticize him endlessly because of those lies. Once he's a liar, that means everything's a lie. That means all of Scientology, all of the processing, everything's a lie because he lied about his biography. I mean, literally, there are people that say that.
Yeah.
Well, Jerry Armstrong had all these boxes showing otherwise than what was being said and put out there.
That was the guy he was doing helping to get the information for Omar Garrison, who was to write the actual
that's right.
Written book biography. And then Jerry Armstrong's going out doing research for Omar. Omar Garrison didn't know. He's just a writer. And then, right. So Jerry Armstrong then starts finding out all this stuff, and he goes back and the GEO just puts it all. It says, no, you can't do any of that. And Omar's going, yeah, I want to write this. No. And then they just totally butchered him. And that's when Jerry just freaked out, blew, and went to that lawyer, Michael Flynn, and said,
Yep.
That's right. That's right. I mean, Jerry came out here. I saw him. He came out to my house once while he was going through. Yeah, told me the whole story. But he was doing okay. He was going around doing lots and lots of lectures and stuff. But
Scientology has destroyed Jerry's life. They have attacked him so much. You know, they even did some life-threatening fair games on him, which is why Kimma Douglas told me the reason why she finally started speaking out, because when she left, Hubbard had told the Guardian's office, leave her alone. And then a few years later, there she was testifying in court. And she said when she found out that they had actually made an attempt on Jerry's life, that's where she was like, gloves are off. Yeah. And she testified.
Yeah. I remember when she left, she came, I saw her in Denver. She called me and we went out to a motel, Rebecca and I, to meet her. I remember the story she told me about LRH when she was with him and he thought he was going to die. And he told her, he says, just bury me under that tree over there. You know, that kind of, she had a lot of interesting stories like that.
Yeah.
But she hadn't said anything about that yet because she was still just left. She wasn't going to say anything. But
right.
But that was the problem. All this stuff together, especially in that PR office, because it all seemed so ridiculous to me, And it wasn't just that. It was also some of the things that we were doing in there. Some of the ideas that he had just were, like he had this idea called PR capers.
Right.
This thing called PR capers that we had to be involved in.
Oh, you're going to tell the caper story, right?
Yeah, at first it sounded like I was thinking, what's this supposed to do? It's this whole caper. He made it, really fun and everything.
What's a caper? PR caper. What is that?
Different capers, different activities. The idea was to boost morale or get more production out of the crew. They weren't getting paid much money, so we'll do a PR caper and give them bonuses, and then we'll do a PR caper and take the bonuses away, and then we'll do a PR caper and give them liberty, and then and we'll give them all and it was always a give and a reach and withdraw on these capers. Mike, should we go into the Kali one now?
I thought that was his first one, believe it or not, but the Kali one, that was, I thought.
What's that? Kali?
Kali, the goddess Kali was this Indian goddess of death and destruction, and the picture of her, she's sitting on the body of her dead husband or something. She's some, this, and in the old movies they would always, kill for Kali, and they'd always have she was some kind of a deed, and so he wanted to do this thing where he would at that time. They were getting a lot of. They weren't getting a lot of FNs in the interns or something. They were getting people were going to the examiner and they weren't floating or something. So he wanted to do a PR caper on all the interns all the intern auditors, and this was his idea. Was he wanted to do this thing about the goddess Kali? So we go down to the where David Ziff was, that area, and had them draw. This, I remember going into the books and we had to draw this big poster of the goddess Kali, and then he wanted to do it in such a way as to make an altar. So we go into the intern room, or it was a room where the interns went, and we set up an altar and everything like that. And then he's filming it. So then the interns are brought in. They don't know what's going on, and LRH is filming it like he did with me going down the stairs, and that was part of his own PR caper on me, supposedly. So this one, as they come in, it's like, we see you haven't been getting you get, what is it called when you don't get the FN, when you get a
red tag.
Yeah, red tag. Right. That's right. So you got a red tag on the thing. Good, well done. You have served the goddess Kali. Now please come to her altar and make an offering because you have done this, great. but it was all kind of tongue in cheek. It was kind of like, it was weird. It was like they didn't know what to do because he was kind of laughing while we were doing it, but it was also kind of an under thing of serious. So they kind of get the idea that I guess he doesn't want us to do red tags.
Was that him that was doing this? That was him that was saying
yes,
that?
yes.
Okay.
He would go.
He was
down would go down nightly.
Yeah, and well,
we're down to the course room, or where?
No, it was like a kind of a course room. I don't remember. It was like a little room where all the interns went.
Yeah,
it wasn't the big course room.
In the tween decks, under the aft well deck, was a hold cover to go down to hold number 3.
Okay.
And so the internship sat on top of that cover to hold number 3, where the CIC was, the Data Bureau. And there was top all around that hold cover to make a room. And that's where the internship was. And so auditors who were learning to audit, and auditors that were pulled in from the orgs and being put through internships, all were in that course room to do their theory studies and to do TRs, and they would leave to go do a session, and then they'd come back and look at their CSs or whatever. So that's where this was on the B deck level. Yeah,
I just remember. I remember how it looked inside with the brown wood. That's all. And then I remember him. Anyway, we did that, and it was like.
Did he dress up? Would he dress up, Janis, or was he just
No, he just. The main thing was just the poster and a little, little place for them to make their little offerings to the goddess and all that to get them, and that was the way. That was the caper. Well, then Laurel Watson decides she wants to do a caper. And they want to do it on the programs bureau, of course, right? Because their stats were always down because nobody did well in the programs bureau. So I don't remember whether that was his idea or hers, but she was running the thing, and she really got into it to the point of where, we put all these things together, for this besides the goddess Kali and the altar. So we're doing this down where where they do the evals data. That was in a different place, and where you go down the stairs and you're down there, and I had to put on a jalaba. Is that the right? What's the hooded thing that they wore in Morocco? Was it called a jalaba?
Yeah,
I wore one of those with a torch, and I would guide the people down the stairs. To the place. At first, I thought, we all thought it was going to be kind of playful like that.
Yeah.
But once it started, it wasn't. She had put together necklaces of chicken bones and a thing with blood, like something like water, red water, so it would be like blood. And then they model a little org, which we didn't. Like a little thing with org on it, and so. They bring these guys in, the programs bureau people. I remember one of the ones that comes in there, and I bring her down the stairs and everything's like that. And then she goes in there, and then Laurel takes over, and then it's like put the necklace on. Wonderful, you've done this. Now bathe your hands in blood. It was so much of this. Then use this hammer and hit the org. And people go, no, I don't want to do that. And it was like really super heavy. And I don't remember who it was. They did it on like 2 people. And by the second person, I'm going, this is not good. And I'm looking over at Wally Burgess, and we're like this. And this other person, I don't remember who it was, but she broke down.
Mo Safadi.
Was it Mo?
It would have probably Mo. Yep.
Started crying. I thought it might have been Sandy. Whoever it was, it just, I said, and then that was it. And I remember going up on the A deck or something with Wally, and we were just both there going, this was horrible. How, and then, of course, these people were really upset. And I remember sitting there praying, oh, my God, I hope they don't put Rebecca in there. But they ended it pretty quickly. And then when LRH realized it was so bad, the next night, it's now a picture of LRH, and everybody's coming in and making, it's all totally versed. but the people there, they weren't pleased anyway.
Oh, yeah.
It was horrible. So
Yeah,
stuff like that. Oh, was it Mo?
To this day, she still will cry about it. It was so enigmatic for her to have to do that. And she said she had to stab the folder. I don't know, a hammer or stabbing it.
He was banging the org with a hammer. That was what she was going, I won't do it. You have to. And that's when, war was just right on her. It was truly atrocious.
Who was the program chief, or who was the one that was leading this?
No, well, it wasn't a program. It was the PR. It was Laurel. It was the PR.
Oh, Laurel. Okay.
Yeah. Laurel, and then I was all of us were participating kind of in this thing, like we did with LRH up top. But this was not fun. It wasn't fun. So they had to come and totally reverse it and do this whole nice thing, but it didn't do it. But everybody was still pretty upset. But that was the kind of stuff that whole. I mean, one thing I remember on that post that I thought was pretty interesting is I was going, well, what about stuff that you've written that's never been published? Do you have anything like that? And I went down, I got to go down to a file cabinet down below somewhere and look through some stuff that he'd written and some books he'd started. Nothing, he didn't have any books that were done. They were started. And I remember all of them the pages were handwritten, not typed, on like 4 pieces of carbon paper. It was all this stuff. Beautiful handwriting, not like mine. Could never. But other than that, it was all this kind of very weird stuff about pushing his image and all that, which I could never figure out what it really would do as far as marketing Scientology. That was ridiculous. So my problem at the time was, I could have done that post. That's what people thought. What's wrong with Gold? He's really gone off the deep end. Why don't you just do the post? Why wouldn't I just do it the way he was saying? Just couldn't do it. So it was from there that I ended up on the RPF. That was how I ended up getting there, was because I'm not going to do that stuff. So get to go to the RPF. So that was my next step, my next adventure was the RPF. And part of me was going,
Rebecca was on the RPF already, right?
Yeah, she was on the RPF. When I went on post, she went on the RPF, and then the whole programs bureau. So she was on the RPF the whole time I was on that post, and a week before I got off, she got out. The week before I went into the RPF, she got out, and then I went in. And so, she was already out, and at this point, finally, they put her back in qual. They let her be the qual sec. And I think Robin Lindsell was the cramming officer and stuff, and David was the CS, David Mayo. They were all at that time. And so I go to the RPF, and that was the hardest thing for me, was I couldn't be with her, even though Mary Sue did give us the conjugal visits and that sort of thing.
That's right. That used to be in the RPF, RPF flag order. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She did. Yeah. Flag order 3434. Yeah.
That's right. Now, how long were people typically in the RPF in those days?
Well, it depended. There were some people in there for a long time, and people like me spent a long time in there because because they weren't tech trained. Because you had to go through a certain area. A certain place in your case. You had to get audited, and you had to audit somebody else up their bridge.
And it was read it, drill it, do it. It wasn't like
all read it, drill it, do it.
Yeah, read it, drill it, and then just go do it. Yeah,
of course. And that's when I really got. Actually, I liked that, to be honest with you, because it really gave me a whole different point of view about what Scientology was. Because I remember doing that read it, drill it, do it, and I was only like a book 1 auditor, HQS grad, and my twin, because they were twinning you according to case level. I was on OT3, so had to be twinned with somebody who was also on OT3 or above, and this woman was a class 8 old timer trained on the original briefing course. This is my order, and I'm what? A book 1 auditor. So I thought, how the hell am I going to audit her? How am I going to do this? So,
who was that?
Should I say? Harriet Foster. Harriet Foster.
Okay.
Foster, sure.
Okay. All right.
She was my twin. So the first thing everybody has to do is just get your basics, metering and TRs and, that kind of a thing. So, I mean, most of that I already had in, so I knew that stuff. And then I have to take her in because, so first thing everybody did was objectives. That was, everybody had to do objectives, no matter where you were before you do the program. Real. So first thing I have to do is take her in and do objectives. So the only place to do it was in the men's bathroom. So I'm going up and down, in the men, from the urinal to the sinks, doing right. And so we get to this one step on that where it's like, put your hands against mine, follow them, and contribute to the motion. Yeah. So and so I do it with her. And, okay, did you do that? She goes, no. She was giving me the wrong answer to what she had just done. She said, or did you, I forget what the question was, but it was, did you do that or did you do it or something?
Did you contribute to that motion?
Did you? And she would go, no. When she actually, and I go, okay, and we do it. And then I said, could you do it? No. She was saying it as if she was, and I, it was like really weird. And I didn't know what to do. And finally, she just totally freaks out. I had to end session. And the guy it was I had to go to cramming, what am I going to do? They had to figure out what the CS, and then I have to take her in and fix her. And it turns out that she had only been run on objectives about 10 zillion times and was totally overrun on this stuff. And so what I had to do is take her in and do all this cleanup and rehabs. And what the hell? And the guy that was doing it with me was a wonderful auditor by the name of Leon Steinberg.
Sure.
Remember Leon? Oh, great guy. Trained by John Galushan, by the way, at St. Paul. But anyway, he was a wonderful guy. One of the only auditors I ever met where you went into session and there was no difference between, okay, talking to the guy and I go, okay, beginning a session. It was never any, this is the session. It was very, very cool. Lovely. So he was going to drill me. He says, you'll be able to do it. We don't have any meters here, but it was the dictionary is the meter, my finger's the needle, and that's how we'll drill. Okay. So I do this stuff with him. I figure, I know what I'm supposed to do. I have to take her in a session, and she does not want to go in with me, right, at all. And I have to, and the session was in somewhere in the engine room, like a wind fan room, it was called. And there's these fans going off so loud, and I had to get her behind these machines and put a table between us so she couldn't run away. It was that bad. And I'm in front there, and this is my first real session, with a person. And I figure, I know what I'm supposed to do, so I just do it. And there was no room to do anything else. I just did that, and then she just did her thing, and she did fine. She says, well, it was great, and it was a wonderful session, and one of the best I've ever had. I go, what did I do? I just did this. And then I started realizing when I started doing that, there's something weird about all this. This is not hard. I mean, why do people have to do a whole briefing course? Why do you have to spend years doing this? When you can just, if you have your basics, you just read it, drill it, and take the guy in. I was doing class 9 actions. So what? It was that kind of a thing. And
Mike, it's funny you mentioned that because, when I was in the RPF, that's how my first auditor training was: read it, drill it, do it. You learned how to do confessionals and sec checks and case cleanup and this and that. It was very simple to do, and you got results, right? And but the funny thing is that Miscavige then years later he changed it where, if you were in the RPF, you had to get a video pass on your TRs and metering by RTC before you could take anybody in session. In other words, you had to become a professional auditor. And so people were in the RPF for years and years and years. It was completely 8 years, some people.
8 years, yeah.
It completely destroyed, what you talked about, where it's just very simple to do, and they made it onerous, and he did it on purpose to keep people, trapped in the RPF. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
You were talking about Harriet Foster, who was your twin. Just a few months ago, I know Dave Foster, her husband, is still alive at the Flagland base. And someone said that they'd heard she was too. So they're still at the Flagland base.
They got to be in their 80s.
Yeah. They showed me a photo of Dave. Oh, still white hair and still in registration.
Still got all his hair?
Wasn't that Stuart? Wasn't that Stuart Moreau who showed us that? Yeah,
Yeah.
Stuart Moreau. You remember Stu?
Yeah.
You remember Stu, right, Mike?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do. God, it's so wild. Ah, my God. Anyway, but that was just something I thought was amazing because I never figured out, people, it wasn't as hard as it was made it. And then you look down the road. Well, of course, you didn't want people to do all these things. You didn't want it that simple. That also. And anyway, so for those reasons, I was kind of enjoying myself to some extent, and I didn't really mind, the other stuff. I remember though David Ziff coming down to the RPF. He was put on the RPF too, and Norman Starkey while I was there, and Owen, everybody. But when people would come onto the RPF, David, I remember, to me, it was so fun. He comes down in a black boiler suit that's too short in the legs, and of course he's wearing his black socks and Oxfords, going down there, and he comes, and a lot of people come down, they I don't belong here, that kind of thing, and he was definitely like, I don't know what I'm doing in this place, and the way they welcome guys to the RPF, they welcomed him that night, which was we'd like to welcome a new member of our RPF, David Ziff. Please, and he's here, and you see the guy just rolling his hands. Oh man, you're gonna applaud me like a student on course. Oh God! So yeah, stand up, David, for us. He stands up, and then everybody yells, "You're busted!" like this, and it just caves. Oh my God, that guy just went like this, just crumpled almost down to. That's what it did. That's the way you get welcomed onto the RPF in those days.
Wow!
Everybody
I did not know that.
Instead of just applauding it, and then the person really arrives, and they just crumble, just like
I would think you'd just quietly let them kind of settle in and become part of it, and not make a big deal out of it because you're being busted.
Yeah, it was to get the guy to realize where you really are. So I don't know who came up with it. I have an idea because I think that's the person. That's where my RPF started going bad. I just figured I'm going to just I'm doing my audit. That's going well. And I just apply the same thing I always did to the deck. You just get your, get the stats up, just produce, and you can't lose. Right. So, that's all. Yeah. Sorry.
No, finish what you were saying.
Yeah, so it's going pretty well, and then I'm painting something. I'm doing putting on the paint, after you do the scraping, I'm putting on some paint, and I spill some paint on the deck. So what do? You just scrape it up. But I have to go to the ethics officer now. You spilled paint on the deck. You have to go to the ethics officer. I'll just scrape it off. No big deal. No, you have to go see this ethics officer. So I go see this guy, and guy says, you spilled the paint on the deck? Okay, you're now I'm putting you in a condition of treason or something like that. I go, what are you talking about? All my stats are up. I spelled some paint. We don't go by that here. What do you mean you don't go by that here? We only go by flag order 3434. I go, that's ridiculous. And he says, you're arguing with me? You're getting an extra month of the RPF. Well, extra month? What are you talking about? You want to argue again? How about 2 months? Like, why don't you give me 6, asshole? 6 months extra in the RPF. And I'm going. At that point, I don't know what to say. I go back and I figure, I'm not going to spend 6 months. I don't care what this guy's a nut, this guy. So then I start. You want to know the name?
Guy? Yes, I do.
Don Cooper was his name.
Yeah, he was the black belt karate
He was like
expert.
a black belt or an ex-Marine or something like that. And anyway, and so he's this ethics officer up there. And these people are scared to shit of this guy. All these people are, and he's kind of like, has these people, and I'm going, what the hell's going on here? And then he had it, and you might remember this, like he would do things like he had us, we're all trying to get through the RPF, which is you got to be sessionable. So you would go, but people would be working on the deck during the day, and then he wanted to kiss up to the messengers. So he offered to clean outside LRH's area, which LRH was really paranoid about germs. So he had to clean his area a specific way. And he told the messengers, I'll have the RPF do this for you. And of course they're going, yeah, sure, why not? We don't want to do it. We don't have to do it. So he would take RPF guys up there to do this cleaning at night, and nobody was sessionable. But he couldn't get into trouble because everybody was happy. And the cleaning, I remember the cleaning where you take a rag, you have a little rag, and you go to the top of the bulkhead, and you go along the bulkhead like this as you're folding the rag as you go along with the dust. And then when it's all wound up, you walk outside and you shake it off the rail, and then you come back in and you do it again. What is this crazy? And so all this stuff's going on, and he keeps doing this and keeping people on the RPF. And everybody's afraid of him. So I'm going, this is nuts. So I go to the bosun, who's his senior. Well, the guy who's the bosun, I don't remember his name. He was, I never knew him anywhere else, either. I didn't know either of them until I went to the RPF. But the other guy was just a real nice guy. I don't remember his name, but he was just this nice kind of, never had very a high post, but he's the bosun. He's in charge of the whole thing, right? And so I went to him and I said, listen, you got a bad guy here. This guy is doing this stuff. And he's going, well, I don't know. What can I do? I said, what do you mean? What can you do? You're the bosun. You're his senior. You're the only one that can do anything about it. So I talked to him a while. So he calls in all of his section leaders, all the guys that are, that running. Section leader was somebody who was in charge of this section of deck. And then as an RPF member, you're under them. So he brings them all in and he starts asking them questions I gave him. And then he starts finding out that this guy's really been doing crappy stuff and that people have been afraid. So he finally, with all their support, busts this guy, right, Cooper, to the deck, just busts him off of that post. So of course we're on the deck together, and of course I don't know the way I was at the time. I let him know that I was responsible for it. See, that's what you get for being such a dick.
What goes around comes around.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I'm telling to him. There, we're scrubbing there, and he's like this. Well, meanwhile, about a week later, one of the decks gets messed up, and the bosun of the ship, who was in he's not any exec. He just hands out the equipment on the deck. But the bosun of the RPF is under him, right? He's his senior. So the bosun of the ship sees that this deck's messed up. So he busts the bosun and he puts Don as bosun. Then he makes the. Well, of course, Don's first action is to call me in, right? Right. And I get put in confusion. This whole thing. And of course, the more he starts doing with me, just the way the more I go at it, go against, I said, good. Is that the worst you can do? I mean, he had me doing these horrible things like it's like dusk and I have to climb to the what do you call it? The crow's nest and clean that out and come down at dark. I wasn't real big on heights. And plus when you're climbing up, it's almost like you're at an angle. Stuff like that. Yeah. And it's, but I just do it. So what else you got, and he put guards, also it was like really, really to the point of where I battled with this guy so much. I end up going, and I think I might've been the RPF's RPF. I don't remember, but it was created. I think might've been created for me at that time.
No, Stu says it was created for Joni, his wife, because she refused to go to the RPF. So Hubbard then made up the RPF's RPF.
Well, then that's what I got put into at that time. Because I remember the first RPF was created for two people, Bob Thomas and what was that jerk's name that ran the missions? What was that crazy guy's name? He was a mission holder, old-time mission. He ended up with a mission down in Texas.
Alan Walters.
Alan Walters. That was the guy. Well,
and Bob Thomas was the assistant deputy guardian U.S.
And they both were brought to the ship. And I remember I'm sitting outside and they had done stuff to where, you throw them out, but he wanted to leave the craft. The RPF was designed for those two guys. That was originally what it was. But anyway, I finally get assigned to the RPF's RPF, and I'm down where your dad was in the chain locker. That's where I had to live. And then I was allowed to come up for meals, but I got to eat what was left over from the RPF. which wasn't much because they got what left over. It's like
from the crew.
And it was always the execs who got to eat first, and then there wasn't enough food that they then supplemented with eggs. So it was like if you weren't a section leader, you probably ate 3 meals a day, eggs, bread, and that's it. That's all you eat was eggs. So, and I actually ended up getting scurvy, touch of scurvy.
Oh, you did? Oh, wow.
I was working on this was a little bit later, but anyway, so I'm in the RPF's RPF, and I'm down there, and my job is I have to clean the thrombus oil out of these tanks, which is almost impossible, so you can eat off them. And I'm down in this really hot little place in the engine room with these thrombus oil, and I'm down there, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going through this, and I'm thinking, this is crazy. I'm not going to do it. So I ended up just sitting there down there, messing around, taking coins, and I even have one. I'll show you. See that? Can you see it?
Yeah. What kind?
That is some from Portugal, and those are like 3 coins that I mashed together in a vice while I'm down there just doing something to do anything, but. Yeah, I'm so upset.
You have it. You have it all these years later.
I had it. I couldn't find. I was just found it the other day when I was talking to you. It was in a drawer. I said, whatever. Anyway,
oh, that's great.
So that I'm doing that stuff, and then the guy who was now the ethics officer, who was an old FBO of mine by the name of Peter Vogadine, and he's now he's in the RPF doing his Cooper's ethics officer. So he'd send him down every day or two, every couple of days, to see if I'd had a cognition. And he'd come down, and I would just flip him off, and he'd leave. That was it. And I'm down there. This is after, I don't know, it's been about a week or something. And I've about had it. And I figured to myself, the only reason, I'm staying here because of Rebecca. If it wasn't for her, man, I'd be gone, And I realized at that point, I figured I'm at the lowest point of anyone on the ship right now. I am the dreg of the dreg. I am at the bottom of the heap. And I figure I have one freedom left to me. One freedom. And that's the freedom to blow. And nobody could stop me if I wanted to do that. I knew it. I mean, LRH, anybody, any of them, nobody could stop me if I wanted to leave. I would leave. I'd go to an embassy and get a passport and go back to the U.S. And I figured that's my only freedom. And once I realized that for a second, I thought, well, I could do that anytime. I can go anytime. Could I take another day? Yeah, I can handle another day. I could do that. And once I realized that I could do, then I had this kind of a realization, this whole thing, I'm here because I'm agreeing to it. Nobody's doing this to me. I said, nobody's doing this. I'm here because I agree to be here. I could leave if I want. So at that moment, something clicked in me to where the whole thing, I wasn't upset anymore with anybody. It's just like, this is me. It doesn't matter what Don Cooper's doing. Who cares?
Right.
I could, if I wanted to, I could toss him off the side of the ship if I wanted. But and I started feeling pretty good. So I figured, okay, well, it's about time to get out of here. So how would I do it? So I better start cleaning thrombus oil. So I just start doing this, cleaning this stuff out. I remember it's like 110 degrees now, cleaning this oil out and doing it. But I went into a thing where I would just work and I wouldn't stop until it was time to eat and time to go to sleep. Right. So a couple of days later, Peter comes down and says, do you have a cognition? I go, look, I don't have any time right now. I got to get I have this much more I have to do today. What? Just leave me alone. I'm working. And I just kept doing that so that every time he came down, I'm busy and I'm cleaning this stuff out and it's looking good and everything. And finally, he comes down after several days and says, just stop, please, just stop. Did you have any kind of a cognition? The bosun wants to know. I go, yeah, I had one several days ago. Really? Tell me, what was your cognition? That Don is one of the greatest beings that there is, and that I really owe him everything. That's what I told him. So about 20 minutes later, Cooper comes down and takes me out of the RPF with his arm around me. Oh, I'm glad you're. Yeah, sure. And he makes me a section leader a little bit. And I mean, it was at then I'm just, figuring, okay, I'll just do what I have to do. And then, yes. Sorry. Yeah.
This might be a good point to start. We're at 1 hour and 5 minutes, unless you've got some other tail end of the story you want to tell.
Tail end of the story. The tail end of the story is oh yeah, okay. Well, the tail end of the story is how I get taken out by LRH. But how long?
Go ahead and start. Hold on, because I'm going to edit this other part out. Okay, go ahead. Start.
Okay. Well, I'll just tell it. Before I went I got to tell this because this is how it ended up. Before I went into the RPF, when I was still on the LRH Properties Chief post, since I was not doing really well and my head was, I found out there were some other musicians on the ship, and I thought it would be fun to jam. So Neil had played sax professionally, and Luton Taylor had played trombone. I believe he'd even played with Count Basie in one of those bands, yeah. And the other guys weren't professionals. There were a couple of guitar players. I don't remember their names, but there were some other musicians. So I asked them, you want to get together? Let's just jam. And I got permission to go into the VIP lounge. I borrowed Murdoch McBride's drum set. He had an old drum set. And we all got up there and we were just jamming. And this other guy named Tom Rodriguez just came up and wanted to play bongos. Sure, play bongos. So we were just all jamming and stuff. It was just some fun to get tension off stuff. So meanwhile, Lynn Disk hears this and she gets this, oh, this is so incredible. And she talks to LRH about it. And they decide to want to do we were in Portugal, they want to do a concert on shore. Put together a concert. What? I just doing this for fun, right? Because for me, this is what I did professionally before I joined the Sea Org. And I didn't want to do this like that. It was just a fun thing. So we ended up going on shore and doing this concert that was set up. And it was like, for me, it was not what I wanted to do, and I couldn't do it anyway. It was just, I don't know. It wasn't fun for me. And then LRH gets this idea that he wants to form this group, the Apollo Stars, right? He wants to do this. He gets into it and all this. And all the other guys, all the other musicians were on low posts or in the DPF or something. So they were all going, yeah, let's do it. How am I going to do this on this LRH? I can't do it. I don't have the time. And plus, I don't like playing this music. I don't want to do this. And to them, it was like, I wasn't into it. And so they just got a different drummer, Charlie Rush. I don't remember if he was there for training or something. And Charlie was a good drummer. So great, you do it. I don't want to do this anymore. And so that was so now I'm in the RPF, and LRH decides that he's going to do this Apollo troop thing. So he takes me out of the RPF to be in this troop along with Norman Starkey and Owen Starkey, right? And that's how I got out of the RPF and went into the Apollo troop. So that's
and the Apollo troop, was that another music thing?
Well, he had the Apollo Stars, the group, the guys that I was with. Plus he brought in some other people like Billy Potter. Bill Potter was a saxophone player. He used to play with Big Mama Thornton. So he had some good musicians, a couple.
And Jeff Levin.
I don't remember Jeff.
Jeff Levin was part of the Troubadours.
Well, that's right. Well, then I'm just talking about the Stars at first.
Oh,
and
okay,
then when he decided to start the troop, he formed two other groups. He formed the Troubadours, which Norman was the drummer. And that's all I remember, the Troubadours, Norman was a drummer.
And what happened is RPFers who could play an instrument ended up coming out of the RPF and going into those bands instead of graduating. And then they wanted to do dances. And so the RPFers who could dance or wanted to be part of it ended up going in the dancing. And even Greg Wilhead got off the RPF to be a dancer.
Yeah. That's right. Greg and Mo. Mo was a dancer.
Yeah, and Mo.
So I get put in this group he brought in this woman by the name of Tashura, who was a singer from Yemen. She was good. She was a good professional singer. But he wanted to have this backup group that would play Mideastern music along with him. And so I'm going to be the drummer. And then Russell Meadows, who was, he had been with the Stars, but he got busted or had a falling out or something, but he didn't want to be there either. But he got put in as a bass player. And then Owen Starkey played clarinet. So they bring him up from the RPF to play clarinet for this group. And then there was some poor schmuck, I don't remember his name. He was some kid from Seattle, and he played piano. And he was just there for training.
John
I don't
Hanson.
remember. Was that his name? But
yeah, Tashira ended up marrying him.
No, not Tashira ended up marrying George Beasley.
Yeah, after this other guy.
Oh.
Or she had a relationship with him. I thought they married.
It had to be later, this guy, because this guy was a little young. This was a little young guy that played piano from Seattle. And he had a cold. He didn't want to be there, but he had to do this. And from the whole time I knew him, he had a cold. He was always had a cold. He was always sick the whole time he was there. And those are the guys. Then I remember her marrying this George Beasley, and she became Tashira Beasley. But anyway.
Right. But I have a photograph of her, and I'll bring it on the next show. I have a photograph of her marriage to this guy with LRH and Mary Sue at the wedding.
Had to be later, after I left. Had to be after the Rock Festival.
It was before she married George, because she left with George. Yeah. She left the ship with George. I don't remember that.
Then maybe it was George that she married after, and I found out about it. Yeah. I don't know, because when I was there, it was just this guy who just had the sniffles all the time on the ship. But I left before that. Anyway, so it was like
this is a good place to stop, I think.
Yeah, we can talk about the group, but that's how I got out and we got put into the Apollo troop at this point. Yeah,
that's great. Those are some great stories, Mike. I know that people are going to enjoy this again, and we want to thank you for being here. Everybody, please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button and notification button so you know whenever these videos come out. If you've got any questions or comments, we read them and Mike reads them, and we're interested in your feedback. So please go down below and write away. And if you want to support our channel, of course, you can buy us a coffee. There's a link in the description. Just click on that, follow the instructions. We appreciate any support that you might want to send our way. Anyway, have you guys got anything else you want to say before we end off? This is another great episode as far as I'm seeing,
another great episode. Mike, I'm enjoying this so much. This is great.
So many things are coming back to me. It's always fun to do this. Thank you guys. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.